Okay, got a sound check. I think everybody can hear me okay. Great. Well, guys, I am super excited for this webinar today, where we will be discussing privacy, data, and relevancy, and ultimately how to find the right balance within your emails. So with that being said, let's make some intros. All right. So guys, my name is Celia Allen. I am one of the enterprise account execs for MessageGears, and I have the utmost pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, Angela Vega. Angela, she is a longtime industry vet. She currently is a senior marketing manager for Verbo, and guys, she brings a ton of knowledge to the table for our conversation today. I'm so pumped to have her here with us and cannot wait to hear the insight that she's going to provide for our audience today. So welcome, Angela.
So how do privacy, data, and relevancy really overlap in email? We're also going to talk about examples of how emails balance these factors, and then go over 5 guidelines on how to find balance within email marketing. So the first thing I want to go over are 3 things that really matter within email. The first thing is privacy. It is essentially the expectation that a consumer's data is safe and their preferences are respected, and standard encryption is used to send emails. This isn't, again, the privacy is not always set on the company. It's just an expectation that a consumer has around their information and how it's handled. The next thing that we have is talking about data. So it's around the information that we collect, infer, and leverage to create a better experience for consumers. This, at the end of the day, is a lot of our bread and butter as marketers. The information that we collect ends up being the information that we use to probably power our segmentation, the content of our audience, and everything therefore after. And the last thing, the most important thing, is around relevancy. So it's how we actually create that connection with consumers. This is where context is added through recommendation engines, cultural events, and other personal milestones. At the end of the day, this is a perception that a consumer has, not necessarily what we as the marketer would like them to have. What we think is relevant may not always be relevant to them as the consumer. So in creating this trifecta, at the end of the day, you want to have all 3 pieces have the right mixture. So the first part of this is you can have 2 pieces like data and privacy. So you can have the right information and they can have trust with you within a brand. But again, you can send a lot of information and still not be relevant to the consumer itself. The next one is privacy and relevancy. So you could have trust in that connection, but again, if you weren't providing them with their own data, a reflection of who they are as a consumer, you can then again miss the mark. And then you also have data and relevancy. So this is when you have the right information and connection, but if you aren't abiding by their opt-in status or the fact that their information should remain private and not be used as content within their email, you could always lose that trust with the consumer. So the goal is really to have a balance of all 3 of these: the right information, the trust, and a connection with them. So what is really being said about the data when they put this out and ask people how they feel about their data being used? So consumers always want to be surprised and delighted, but they also want their information to be factual and to be beneficial to them. So most of consumers, around 90% of consumers, say they're willing to share their behavioral data if additional benefits are provided to make their shopping cheaper or easier. This is all to say, if the benefit is for the consumer. I know a lot as marketers, we're all about data mining and getting that information because we think it's going to be beneficial to us. But at the end of the day, if we can't put in a light that's beneficial to the consumer, it's not necessarily information that we should be using. On that same end, there's a point to where the amount of information we have at our fingertips can be considered a little bit creepy. And there is about 38% of consumers said they would stop doing business with the company if they found personalization efforts to be a bit too creepy.
And I think, you know, the key here is the end goal for the consumer is typically a benefit, right? So we're usually expecting something of value in return. And I know just when I provide my information to a company or a brand, I'm typically in expectation for something the brand can offer. And it doesn't always have to be a tangible thing. It could be a number of things. So
yes, absolutely. So this brings us to some examples we wanted to share with everyone, where I kind of want to show how emails can fall on a spectrum. So the first one is the Atlanta Hawks cheerleaders. And this one is interesting because this email was sent to a Hawks season ticket holder to promote the team Cheerleaders Prep Clinic. But at the end of the day, the recipient was actually male. And this, of course, doesn't say there can't be any male cheerleaders. It just so happens the Atlanta Hawk cheerleaders happen to be all female. And though this person was actually subscribed themselves to that database, so the privacy needs were met, data was not used, which made it very low on the relevancy. This is why sometimes it's important to understand the entry source associated with receiving an email, because if a person received an email buying Hawks tickets and you collected a certain amount of information, that information should be used further downstream in your segmentation to make sure that the relevancy, well, the data that you're using increases the chance of relevancy here. So a good example of how, you know, as marketers, we can meet all the privacy needs and still miss the mark without leveraging data and then sending an email that's pretty irrelevant to the end consumer. Another example is Experian. This is actually an email that I received. So the background on this one is that I unfortunately had my identity stolen a couple of, well, I guess about a year back. And I signed up specifically for Experian to freeze my credit. And that was the only reason why I signed up with them. In this email that I received, there was a member ID, obviously my email address in the two, my first name, as well as what they thought my credit limit was. And then, of course, knowing that I was signed up for Experian. So from my perspective, this one didn't necessarily meet the privacy concerns. They used a basic standard encryption to send me the email. I, of course, was opted in, but the reasons I was opted in was specifically for freezing and unfreezing my credit for notifications there. And the information they provided in the email, in fact, was wrong. That is not my credit limit. This is always a good question to first, again, understand to the first point, entry source. The entry source that came in was under the freezing my credit under something that was of concern to me, and they had a product that solved that. They're now advertising things that, of course, put me at more risk on top of that. And then their data, despite the fact they have a small disclaimer at the bottom that says based on your last login date, it's always safer to not use any data if you think there's any chance it could be wrong. The threshold I usually use is if at any point the data is around 90% right for most consumers, it's around safe to use. And then you try to bridge that gap with conditional formatting to say, if you don't have the data, please remove this sort of content. I think they could have done a few different things here to make it a little bit better. They could have removed that. They could have seen when my last login date was to see if it had expired for more than 15 or 30 days. So then they could have reduced that risk. They could have also increased the relevancy, knowing that if I came to them to freeze my credit, then maybe I'm not exactly here to open up more accounts if my goal is to reduce the risk I had associated with it. So that's kind of another example of how all three of these work together. And it's even more important that when you have this sort of data, that you have it, you know, behind a firewall where it is safe, because obviously the risk to me is in regards to the email client, but you could have even more risk if this data is sitting out exposed for somebody else to kind of look at.
I love that point, Angela, and you're speaking our language here at MessageGears. I think a quick noteworthy plug here for the MessageGears platform is that we actually use camned encryption, and so this allows our clients to really personalize based on any attribute in their database without risking that data to any exposure, whether it's internally or within the cloud. It also allows our clients to leverage their segments and kind of communicate in a way that's unique to every individual customer at scale. Meanwhile, they're not exposing any PII to the cloud, which is the biggest point. So, but yeah, love this point.
Awesome. So this brings me to my third email. This one's actually probably one of my favorite emails that I get every once in a while. If you're signed up for Google Maps, I don't know if you're an avid, maybe Apple Maps user, but I love Google Maps. So this email was sent to me in the new year. So it was sent to me in January 2020. I was very fortunate enough last year to go to about 9 different countries, some of it for work, but also some of it for pleasure. And I found that this email was only missing a handful of data points. So in terms of privacy, I knew I had specifically signed up for these emails, and nothing within this email could put me at risk for anything. It, focused on locations that I went to, but there wasn't anything that I would consider high that would put me at risk for things being stolen or for my identity being compromised. In terms of the data, like I said, almost everything was there. Only a handful of things were missing. I was still pretty impressed with what they had. And from the areas that were missing, I think that actually comes down to a limitation on the countries and less on Google itself. In terms of relevancy, I think this is a really good example of when New Year's comes around, everyone's looking for the synopsis of how their year was. And if you happen to be one of those brands like Fitbit, like Spotify, or like Google, to where you're constantly collecting activity over a year's time frame, you can then kind of see that this sort of stuff can be timed within the new year to still be relevant and be a summary. One thing I would have done a little bit better is there wasn't any really action to take. And of course, Google Maps itself isn't a product that I pay for. It's supported indefinitely by advertising products and other things that kind of go along with it. But I also know that Google Maps does have a connection, I think, with, Google Photos. And that is at one point, if you want to go with a higher level amount of bandwidth that you can upload photos to, that could have been a really good cross-pollination between their products to say, go check out the photos that you have from these trips that you took. So there was really no action. It was just kind of a nice to email. And I think that's something as marketers, we just have to be careful. There's a lot of times where we should send nice emails to people that don't necessarily have a CTA. But I think if it's being used often, like monthly statements or something, it's something we need to really consider what is the ideal action we want from consumers. The next one is Groupon. I'm sure everyone on this call has probably received about 5 different emails this morning from Groupon already. I myself have shopped with them frequently. And this is kind of one where I think missed the mark because I actually shop on Groupon often. They were constantly sending things I've actually never shopped for. And so if you're going to send me 5 emails a day, make sure it's emails that happen to be relevant to me. And at this point, they really weren't. And so this is one where, again, I was still signed up for Groupon. So they were meeting all the requirements there. There wasn't any pie here that I should be concerned about. The data, though, was lacking, and so was the relevancy. I don't think I need any cream or another a metal photo clock or land on Mars. And I happen to be very happily married to my husband of 8 years. And so again, a lot of the stuff on this email wasn't very relevant to me because of the lack of data. And the last email is from Better. So I've kind of been shopping around for another mortgage another house, and I happen to need a mortgage for that. And so I decided to go to LendingTree to give it a try because I know at the end of the day, they really put supposedly the power into the consumer's hands, let things kind of crawl to you. So I go through the process, I fill in a whole bunch of personal information that surrounds like my financial well-being. And after submitting, the very first email I get is from better.com in partnership with LendingTree, but it is in fact from the subdomain better.com. And at no point did I choose them, but of course that's what they're including in their subject line. So the first email that I ended up getting after using the service was from a product that I did not choose or was I ready to kind of commit to. I was just, again, surfing around. Now, I'm sure I missed it somewhere in the T's and C's. But at the end of the day, I think this, again, comes down to consumer expectations. So I don't feel my privacy was respected here. This information was handed over, my email address, who knows what other information was handed over with it. Of course, it was lacking data. That's probably to the fact that maybe they didn't hand over too much information. And then the relevancy was actually still really high because obviously I was looking for a mortgage. So this is a really good example of where you can hit with high relevancy, but you cross the line on a handful of other things like privacy and data. Awesome. So next, probably what you're all very interested in is understanding 5 guidelines to actually find balance. I've been in email marketing for about a decade now. I've worked everything from fintech to consumer health, and now I'm in the travel and hospitality business. And this is always a very hard balance to strike, especially as someone who has worked in very data-enriched environments. And as well as making sure that those are very personalized products for people, that you have to be specific on what you're offering, because getting it wrong is very detrimental to the trust. So 5 guidelines that I generally have is, the first one is you can create relevancy with generalizations. Everyone kind of assumes that you have to have personalization in order to make things powerful. And personalization is powerful, but relevancy is still supreme. You can communicate with consumers using context in the world we live in. So a really good example of this is right now, the world we live in. Clothing stores could keep sticking with, buy your summer dresses to look great at your Sunday picnic, but at the end of the day, that's not what anybody's doing. So Cricut did a good job of this, to where they're talking about isolation inspiration. So basically outfit ideas for the homebodies, and that you're not necessarily going to the gym anymore to look all cute in your matching outfit. You're probably just doing lots of neighborhood walks. SoFi actually created an email that started going out daily. And I really, really like this, because they not only have content that fit the needs, they literally changed their email marketing strategy to fit it, which was a daily email to go out specifically to actually their millennial database, because SoFi is kind of like an alternative way to bank, where everything's done online. And you can see here that they include in their newsletter what the markets are doing and relevant stories associated with it. And then, of course, you have the Food Network. Everyone here is probably eating much more often at home, whether or not we have the skills to actually cook at home. And so you can see here that they started sending emails that are talking about live from home with all their top star chefs that they have, and then actually learning to cook with them. So again, it's meeting something that is very relevant within our times, and really nowhere in any of this is there any personalization. I guarantee that most of these are batch and blast emails.
That's a great point. I would say, maybe you as the brand don't have a lot of data to work with to personalize your content. I hear that from clients I work with every day, that they might not have the ability to use their data or collect a ton of data for whatever reason. So this just goes to show you that you can still be relevant without what we in our industry consider true personalization, and it could be just as powerful. So I love this example.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely like seeing everything coming through. So the next one is transparency adds clarity and context creates trust. So I don't know how many times you've ever received an email where you don't understand why you're receiving it, and it can be very, very confusing. A good example is one from Uber Eats. So the context is included within the email itself. You could have just said a little kindness goes a long way, and then just explain the reason on why supporting delivery people through Uber Eats is important. But what they did is they said, thank you for tipping. So you're receiving this email because, 1, you probably ordered Uber Eats, and 2, you probably did a tip, if not something generous. And then, of course, they match the context with what's happening during these times today, that what you're doing, what you're tipping is actually going a lot further than what it did beforehand. And you can do this with a lot of emails. This is, for example, when people and travel companies end up making a booking. I've seen some emails come through on geolocation from Target when I walk out of a Target store and they say, thank you for shopping. Those can also definitely go on the side of creepy. But at the end of the day, because they include in the email, thanks for shopping with us, or thanks, we just noticed you were here with us, it adds a little bit of clarity to why I received the email and can kind of create some trust with what they're using with that information. The next one is around relevant actions and not data showboating. It's very, very hard. I remember when I first got started in my career, we didn't have a lot of data to kind of work with. And so it was always using the generalizations principle I mentioned at first. But I eventually got to a point to where I can include in any and all data points I ever wanted. And the challenge with that is sometimes you end up sending mixed signals on what you want the next action to be. So a good example of this is a lot of the time that monthly benefits summaries end up just stating a whole bunch of data points. This is your points, this is what your next one, here's your status, you've been a member since. Like, they're just trying to say, hey, we know who you are. But what they're missing is, hey, we don't know what we want you to do next. At the end of the day, every email you send, for the most part, even ones that are meant just for engagement, and not for a transaction of sorts, should still have some sort of action. And I noticed this with a lot of monthly benefit summaries, that they're missing what they want you to do next. The question would be is, how do you get me to that next level? Is there an offer going on right now? Is there, even during these COVID times, is there something to where y'all have extended your cancellation windows or something of that sort? It's so important that we don't get carried away with data just to, again, showboat, but it's really about including what we want them to do next. And a lot of the time that's considered an MBA, a next best action, for a consumer to take that next step on what we think they should be doing in order to further the problem solving, what their need is.
Yeah. And also, if I didn't ask for it, don't assume I want it, you know. It kind of goes back to your point in your example, Angela, where you mentioned previously the brand that, you know, gave your information to their sister brand, but without your consent. So I think we can all agree that right now, you know, consumer expectations, they're going up, they're not going down. And if the consumer gives you their information or if they purchase from you, obviously their expectations are likely now going to be higher than they were previously. So just use the data in a smart way where it in turn surprises and delights the consumer. I know it's a popular phrase right now, but I think ultimately you just don't want to start off the relationship with broken trust because that relationship probably won't go too far. So.
Absolutely. So the next one is around first-party data. I'm sure as marketers, we've always been faced with this, people asking if we can append to our data or if we want to go purchase more emails. I'm definitely in the camp that your earned own data, whether it's email addresses or data points, discrete data points associated with those email addresses, are much more valued if you own them versus purchasing them. So all this to say, your explicit or implicit actions taken on your site should be used for personalization. However, the idea of using third-party data to enrich your site data might cross the line. So it's something just to be super careful about. I always tend to stray away from it. But again, a good example is better.com. I don't know how much of my information they now have, but I at least know they have my email address, and now I'm signed up for their newsletter for the foreseeable future until I unsubscribe. But appending information, it happens a lot in the banking industry. For example, looking at credit scores or looking at their net worth of assets, and possibly even in car salesmen for dealerships. They're also looking to append that sort of data. And it's just something that can be it can definitely be a little bit creepy. I think it's always best to ask the person for that information first, than to go out and try to find it yourselves and then either use it for content or for segmentation. If you are going to end up using data anyway, I strongly suggest you keep it at a segmentation level and not a content, and you make sure that you're being super clear about what you're offering them versus including that information specifically within the email content.
And, you know, remember also the stat that Angela presented earlier in the very beginning, where it said 90% of consumers, you know, say that they're willing to share their behavioral data if additional benefits are provided that make shopping easier or cheaper. So case in point, that's solving a problem. It's exactly what Angela is saying right now.
Yes, which is great because that leads me to my final point. Personalization at the end of the day is problem solving. And when we're talking about problem solving, we're not talking about your problem as a marketer, we're talking about their problem as a consumer. One of the popular sayings I've heard a few times is that we don't buy our hammer and a nail to put a hole in our wall, that we buy it to hang a picture. Email personalization is very, very similar. We add information to solve a problem, to give our consumers guidance or to reduce friction. At the end of the day, our goal and our job is to really reduce the cognitive friction on making decisions, to build trust with them via the brand, and to get consumers what they actually need. A really good example of this is Capital One. Again, they have a lot of private information in here, like my full name as well as the last 4 digits of my card. Obviously, they have my email address, and they have lots of little data points in here. So on privacy, I think they could do a little bit better of a job. I think they're probably just trying to reinforce that they know me in some sort of way. But what I do like about this email is that a constant problem that most consumers have is that we love swiping our credit cards, and our credit cards are more and more being used for reoccurring subscriptions that we have on a monthly basis. And it's really hard to keep track of all of them. So what Capital One did here is they use this sort of data to actually post my reoccurring charges that I have. And so you can see here, I have a handful of them. Groupon is, again, how much money I spend with them. I guess they see it as a reoccurring charge, when in fact it isn't. I just spend money on it on a monthly basis. But this is a really good example of solving a problem that most consumers have, using data, working within the privacy that they have, and it's something that is very highly relevant, which is my money and how well it's doing. So again, at the end of the day, personalization is really should be there to solve a problem, not to showboat, not to add more details to an email than that's necessary. So in summary, it's really 5 takeaways that you should have, is that you should create relevancy with generalization. There's nothing wrong with having little to no data on your consumers. In fact, most of the databases I've worked with, majority of that database didn't have any actions associated with it because they signed up for an account and they didn't necessarily do anything with it. So there's really nothing to market to them within personalization. So we have to stick with generalizations. Be transparent on the why a consumer is receiving something. It's very easy for you to get caught up on like, well, I'm triggering this campaign because of X, Y, and Z. They don't know that. They only know what's being said in the context of the email. So it's okay to say you left something in your cart. They now know the reason why they received the email is because they abandoned something on your site. That's a really good example of what most companies do, is they have a very clear subject line on cart abandonment. Show the relevant actions, not data showboating. So it's super easy to get caught up in the fact that once you have data that you want to mention all of it. You need to whittle it down to what you think is going to be the most impactful to someone's decisions. If it ends up being how quickly something might fly off the shelf, then you want to use urgency messaging, but you also don't need to include the price, the reviews, and 15 other things. Stick with the simple things on the product or on the consumer that is really going to drive them to the next action. Utilize the first-party data and limit third-party data. This is just, I think, a best practice of all marketers. It's really easy to get, looped into someone saying, well, for 10 cents a person, I can append 15 different fields for you. It can be done, and I've seen it be used, but it's very rarely I've seen it be used to where it actually has a positive ROI on the effect of purchasing that sort of data. It's more important that you have your own data and you're keeping that data as safe as possible. And then lastly, you want to use personalization to solve the consumer's problem. This is kind of very similar to show the relevant actions, but at the end of the day, using that personalization to solve a consumer's problem is about making sure the information that is present is what's going to be most beneficial to them and not to you as a marketer.
All right. Well, really quick spiel on MessageGears. Angela, thank you so much again. I think we have like a little bit of time at the end for Q&A, so I'm going to run through this really quick just for those who aren't familiar with MessageGears. We're a customer marketing platform. You can think of MessageGears as a cross-channel ESP, but we're really specifically built for the needs of companies like Verbo and other enterprise organizations out there who manage a lot of data and are in turn sending millions and millions of emails and messages every month, every year. We are definitely known for what you see listed here. So we provide our clients with direct access to their data. So there is no data syncing back and forth between what you have in your organization as in your local environment and a legacy cloud product. MessageGears just kind of looked at the world a little differently and said, why not bring the platform to you? So this approach, it just in turn gives our clients a ton of agility and scale because they're now able to use all of their data that they have on their consumers in real time. So this, I would say for the enterprise space specifically, can be a challenge sometimes. You've got a lot of data and that back and forth sync just doesn't cut it. So again, because we are connected right up to our clients' data, we can actually get you guys up and running in weeks and not months or years. I've heard a ton of stories this week about clients who have taken years to get fully migrated to another solution. So our implementations are much faster and because of our unique approach. And at the end of the day, you should not have to dread an ESP migration. It should not be a bitch to switch. And yes, so we have 3 products today. We recently, released 2 products. So the common product for those who are familiar with MessageGears is our message product. So this is kind of what I was alluding to earlier. That's our cross-channel ESP platform. We can handle email, push, and SMS. Our new product segment, this is one of our latest releases where you can pretty much dream and do with any of your audience segments. So it's in essence an advanced segmentation builder that really is now going to allow you to slice and dice the audience however you want, and then easily export them to various third parties like Facebook, Google AdWords, any other channels. And then lastly is Engage. It's another new release that we have. Super excited about this as well. This was really just created to provide our clients with a much simpler way to manage their real-time contextual data personalization for any channel. And again, I didn't want to belabor this because I know we're kind of coming up on time, but all of our products were created with your customer data kind of at the heart of it. So no longer are the days where your technology is hindering you from getting what you need to get done. But with that being said, guys, I think we'll just take some time for those who are able to hang on for some Q&A. I did see some questions come in, so I wanted to make sure we addressed them before we hopped off. So really quick, first question I saw, if I struggle to get access to customer data, what are some other examples of good generalized campaigns that can work during normal times? Great question.
Yeah, great question. So I think one of the big things that you can always do is if you don't have the personalizations, you can always use the context of kind of, again, the world that we live in. You can do things like holidays that are coming up or large cultural events. I know when I think Harry and Meghan ended up moving to Canada, there was a lot of travel companies that took advantage of that. And then, of course, holidays are very specific to regional, but those are always really good campaigns that you can do to kind of go with the times that you have. You also have things like you have context of how people are behaving in your database. So though it's not behavioral data in regards to the action with your product, it might be behavioral information on how often they're engaging with your emails. So you could always set up campaigns around win back. So when people are starting to kind of decay in your database, how you could bring them back. You also have little things such as your entry source. So making sure that if someone's coming in through a newsletter widget versus an account creation versus something else, that you're tailoring the content to that. So though it may not be specific to, you know, hey, Jeff, thanks for entering our database on 3:30 p.m. With the intent to purchase this, it can just be like, hey, thanks for creating an account, or thanks for signing up for our newsletter, things like that.
Nice. And I'm getting the flag waved at me virtually. So I'll ask one more question that came through. The question was, how do you feel about brands that use location data to target ads to customers based upon where they are? Is that good personalization or creepy?
Ooh, really good question. So I think it always is going to happen within context. We see this around our websites a lot. Obviously, when you visit one website, then you go onto Instagram or Facebook, and somehow you now have nothing but ads from them as far as the eye can scroll. I think when it comes to email, geo-targeting location, I think it's very useful in some industries. So particularly within the travel industry, if I know the location of a traveler and I know that they like booking flights to certain places or making trips to certain places, I think it's extremely useful. But I think that maybe you need to be wary on some industries possibly using geolocation to where it might feel like they're infringing on your personal space and getting creepy. And that could just think if that information goes beyond you and kind of goes to your children or your loved ones around their location and how easy it is to get to them. But the example that I used of Target, knowing my location of leaving their store, I think is a really good example of one where I think they do it tastefully, knowing that I was in their store, and most of the time what they're asking is for feedback on how my visit was or how my purchase was. And so it can definitely get to a point of creepy, but I think it's mostly safe if you as a consumer can or you as a marketer can put yourself in your consumer's shoes and really think, is this useful? And is it relevant?
Awesome. Well, everyone who stayed on, thank you so much. Hopefully this was a helpful session and informative for everybody who joined. And any follow-up, definitely direct it to myself or Angela. We are happy to get any additional questions answered. But I hope you guys have a fantastic day. And I have to give a huge thank you to Angela. We really appreciate your insight and your feedback, Angela. And yeah, we hope everybody has a great day and stay healthy and safe out there, guys.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Can't wait to do it again.
All right. Bye.
Bye, everyone.